Welcome, adventurers. Today we're going to turn all this stuff into this ruined chemical plant. And that was a viewer's suggestion. As I was updating my list, I realized I hadn't made any yet. And it's the least I can do. So moving forward, once a month, I'm going to try to make a viewer-suggested video. There's some great suggestions, and I'd love to hear more. So as I get done writing down this manufacturing conveyor system, which was my most recent suggestion, if you would like to be a part of that, then you should, well, like the video. You should also share it and subscribe. It helps the YouTube algorithms, and I'm actually very close to 1,000 viewers, subscribers, and that's thanks to people like you. Even if this does sound like a PBS telethon, it really is helpful to me. I appreciate your support and your viewership. So please like, share, subscribe, and stay tuned for your suggestion. Now on to the craft. XPS Foam, pretty standard stuff. Got a 1/2-inch piece as the base, a 1-inch piece as the riser. These are the water reservoirs of some cheap squirt guns, and I measured them to make a base for them. Here I'm using Gorilla construction adhesive to attach the foam to the deck. I do that for a few parts of this build because the construction adhesive works really well. Words, it's only talking, it shouldn't be this hard. Making some circles in the same kind of foam. I'm going to make cradles for those two tubes so they look like they're resting in concrete poured to support them. Pretty simple. I'm going to use a hot wire to cut out the semicircles there. As slow and as steady as you go, you still don't get perfect cuts every time doing it that way. I need a straight up jig for that. I had to sand them afterwards. Now I'm going to cover the threads with EVA foam because these little bottles have threaded necks. It takes about 1.4 centimeters or 14 millimeters to cover them. Obviously I sanded the tubes so that they would take super glue, and there's the super glue. Now when I place these in the cradle here in a minute, I make sure that that seam is facing down so it's not very visible. Hot glue to secure them in the cradle, and more hot glue to secure said cradle to the deck the raised platform that I have them set on for this video. Just like this. Obviously you want to get rid of your stringy hot glue mess because it's basically invisible until you paint, and then you can only see it. So be mindful when you can, and ever on the lookout for those stringy little bits. Super glue to hold my little plastic toy tubes to the little plastic squirt gun bottles with some super glue there, and just some basic hot glue in the other end where it connects to the foam. Made for a very, very secure fit. Now tanks and valves are one and the same. They go hand in hand, I should say. This is that 4.5 millimeter knitting needle from the dollar store. Cut a little bevel into it so it rests on the tube very nicely. Super glue on a gear-shaped bead. Use a little baking soda to make sure it has a solid hold. And then I'm going to use some model cement. It's the acetone stuff, because both the plastic pipes and these knitting needles actually go real well with the model cement. It does its job and melts them together. Here, more construction adhesive on sanded LaCroix cans and some lids from some bottled tea to fill in the gaps at the top. By the way, the recess in a bottle or can is called a bunt, just in case you were curious. Now I want to make some reinforcing bands for these tanks to show that somebody cared about them being structurally sound, and I would make a dozen of those, which was a lot of cutting. Each one of these is 5 mils, 1/2 centimeter wide, because it was a nice look at the scale. So after a dozen of those have been cut, I wrap them around. Now I use the printing seam on the can from where the logo was printed on it to align these straps so that they all have the same start and end point. And then to cover the small gap, I cut a 1-inch piece of the same EVA foam, super glued into place, And this will be like the retention strapping that holds the reinforcing band in place. And as you know, EVA foam takes super glue exceedingly well. And of course, repeat for all cans. And these are some cheap beads I got from the dollar store on a sheet. And I thought they were just individually stuck on the sheet, but in fact they are held together with a string going in both directions. So there's no less than 2 points of contact on each and every bead. They're also self-adhesive. And I realized that they're kind of a pain to work with. They stick to everything. They've got a lot of cleanup you have to do, unless you just grab and strip them off like grapes from a bunch of grapes. Then they come off pretty easily and leave most of the string and adhesive behind. Now I need to make what looks like a concrete reinforced cradle for these barrels as well, or these tanks. And I'm going to use 3mm XPS foam, and it's 1 inch because that's the thickness of the board that I'm using there. Hot glue it in place to hide the oddly distinctive shape of the soda can. On one side, which is the front, I put a slightly higher piece where the pipes will connect, like you see here. And I use construction adhesive to glue all that down as well. Now I'm going to destroy one of these because it's a ruined chemical plant. And if you enjoy watching me break stuff that I just spent hours building, then you should like, subscribe, and hit the notification icon. And of course, if you want to see your build in a future video, leave a comment. I do read them. And I make a list, an ever-growing one. Now when you're cutting aluminum cans, be careful. The edges can be very sharp. Mine was not, for whatever reason. Maybe it's the way I cut it, or maybe it's just the material this particular type of can is made from, but the edges were not sharp at all. So I got lucky. Kind of shape it and crush it a bit to make it look like it had a very bad day. And of course, attach the pipe back to the front of it because it was being fed with chemicals when it exploded and nobody had shut it off. Hot glue's the winner for this one in both ends, getting rid of the little stringy bits like we just talked about. And of course, get it in place, making sure to keep your hot glue gun right in front of the camera, just like that. Now that's professional filming. Can't see what I'm doing, nor should you, because why would you watch a video otherwise? Now this is self-adhesive drywall mesh. I picked it up from Wylock or Eric's Hobby Workshop or Black Magic Crafts to make some grating. Here is some heavy-duty paper that I cut to make some framing for that grating. Just some Eileen Stacky glue to put it in place. And then these little Walmart hex-shaped sequins, which I realize are very thin and don't give you a lot of texture. So maybe avoid getting too thin a sequin or beads or whatever, because they don't show up in the end as well as I might like. Now I didn't video the blue bits being put in, but they're spreaders for Petri dishes. I'm going to take a wooden dowel and hot glue it onto these, and I'm going to cut them off just where that exploded tank is, because obviously it blew out the catwalk when it exploded. I'm going to hot glue in my catwalk pieces for the most part, because obviously part of it's blown out, and that extra piece that's missing there is actually going to be embedded in the deck lower down next to those other two smaller tanks that are on their side. Just like that. Now originally where that little red lid is, I was going to have a small building, but it crowded the area too much, so I opted out of it. The green piece is an extra from something I 3D printed a long time ago and never put together. The little building I was just describing, actually. Now to make sure it sticks down well, I rough up the foam underneath where the lid will be. More construction adhesive. Sanded lid I put down in place and then twist a little bit to make sure it bites and pushes glue into all those nooks and crannies. Super glue in some toothpicks so that this has something to bite into, because unlike the other areas, it doesn't have really solid connection points on two different planes. So I want to make sure it does. I hit it with some super glue accelerant here, and then using more construction adhesive, I glue it in, and though I don't show it, I super glue the other end to the inside of the lid. and I make another knob just like on the other two horizontal tanks, but this one I made to look broken. Super gluing a ladder, which you can see me make in my abandoned fortress build, and now acetone plastic glue to intentionally melt little craters into the foam. Ultimately, chemicals have spilled out a lot of these tanks. Put in some rubble and debris. Make sure everything looks good. Cover it with black Mod Podge paint mixture and intentionally go thin in some areas. And the reason I did that is because I want the accelerant in the spray paint to dissolve some of the concrete to make it look more worn and old. Here it is with a black base coat and zenithal highlight in gray. There's some of the melted foam I wanted. Some more there on the corner and on that reinforcement band. Some more on the back. It turned out really well. I was happy that I figured out how to intentionally do that now. I want the tanks to be kind of a tan color and practice with my airbrush because I suck at it. Some pewter gray for the concrete. Some kind of a deep brown base coat color for rust effects on the metal bands and cap for that. A more reddish brown for these pipes. A green for one of the tanks. A Ferrari red for the other one. Matte black on, well, everything I wanted to be metal. And there's that. Now it's time to do a little weathering. Now the weathering is pretty straightforward. Wet your surface, then hit it with your black paint, water, and dish liquid mixture. It makes it run and look more natural. You definitely don't get as many tide marks and whatnot. Now going with my rust recipe, which is actually Model Air's rust recipe, but dark to light from a reddish brown all the way up to a mustard yellow. And getting smaller and more sporadic with the dabbing. And using the sponge to dab actually gives you texture as well. So it looks like raised bubbled rust. And it means I have to use less of this dirty down rust to really enhance the effect. Now I put the paint rust effect as well as the dirty down rust on everything. The pipes, the tanks, the lids of the tanks, just about everywhere. Dry brush all the concrete with a light gray. All the black metal with a cheap silver. And now for some special effects. What's in that tank there is a failed mixture of isopropanol, clear acrylic, and yellow dye. Here it is just that kind of ochre color and gloss Mod Podge. Here's a purplish color I mixed up in gloss Mod Podge into some of the puddles. I even have it dripping off of the pipes and running down the tanks. A bluish teal one that I mixed up. Again, just inks and gloss Mod Podge. Here is more of that clear acrylic and green dye this time, because I wanted this bright green sludge, and that's what it turned into. Now the yellow didn't turn out at all, even though on my tests it looked great. Here it did not. So scrap it. Mix some glue in that same green paint to enhance the green color I wanted. Later I will cover that with gloss Mod Podge in that green paint to bring back the gloss. And while I was making this video, I watched one from Creative Cuts where he was making a chemical plant, oddly enough. Great minds, or maybe I'm a copycat. At any rate, I mixed some yellow into that, and then it turned brownish red. I don't know why. Something in that lid reacted with it. The stuff that I had left over stayed yellow. At any rate, here's my ruined chemical plant. Bright green ooze, a brackish, brownish red cesspool tank, puddles and spills, leaks from everywhere, lots of rust. Definitely looks like a place that you wouldn't want to go to willingly. But whatever game system you use this in, whether it be, Necroumnda, 40K, some sci-fi game, Fallout, it definitely would fit in. Some people have definitely died around this thing, and well, maybe your kill team is the next one to do so. After I hit it with the gloss Mod Podge, that green really popped. Now we got some figures on there so you can see the playability of it. Lots of areas for cover and height advantage. Well, I hope you enjoyed it today. Thank you for watching. Now go have an adventure in crafting.